Hey guys, and welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into a living room filled with pastel plastic, nervous laughter, and the particular kind of joy that only comes from a stack of leftover containers with their lids finally, triumphantly, on straight. We're talking about what it was really like to attend a Tupperware party in 1950s America. The folding chairs, the demonstration games, the casserole dishes passed hand to hand like small miracles of modern engineering. Before we begin, I want to thank the viewer who suggested this one. Your ideas keep shaping where this channel goes, and honestly, some of the best evenings we have spent together here started with a single comment like yours. If you are enjoying these evenings with us, a like or a subscribe helps more than you would think, and if there is an era or a moment from American life you would like to see next, just leave it in the comments. We read every one. And if you would rather listen than watch, we are now on Spotify as well, so feel free to check the link in the description if that suits your evening better. For now though, dim the lights if you have not already. Let the fan hum in the corner. Get yourself settled under something soft because tonight is not a night for sitting up straight. What did it actually feel like to walk into a neighbour's living room and find the coffee table pushed aside for a demonstration? What did burping a sealed container sound like the very first time, before it became second nature? What did the women talk about while they waited for their turn to try the flip-top seal? What did it smell like in that living room? Coffee, hairspray, a hint of casserole warming in someone's oven down the hall. And just like that, it is 1954. Someone has already knocked on the screen door. There is a card table set up near the good lamp, and a woman you have known for years is arranging small plastic bowls like she is preparing for a ceremony. The evening is just beginning. It starts with a small card, cream-coloured, tucked half under the sugar bowl where you will not miss it. Your neighbour's handwriting slants to the right, cheerful and a little rushed, inviting you to her home on Thursday evening for something she calls a Tupperware party. You turn the card over once, as if the back might explain more, but there's nothing there except a smiling clip art housewife holding a bowl toward the sky like an offering. You set the card down beside your coffee cup and read it again, slower this time, the way you might reread a letter from someone you have not heard from in a while. The kitchen around you hums with its usual morning sounds, the percolator ticking on the stove, the radio murmuring low from the counter, the faint clatter of your children finishing breakfast before school. None of it changes because of one small card, and yet something in you feels quietly rearranged. The way a single new thought can shift the whole shape of a day. You wonder, briefly, what a Tupperware party even is. You have heard the phrase mentioned once or twice at the beauty parlour, tossed between women getting their hair set, spoken with a particular enthusiasm reserved for something new and slightly mysterious. Someone had laughed about burping a bowl, whatever that meant, and you had smiled along without quite following, the way you sometimes do when a conversation moves faster than your understanding of it. You slide the card into your apron pocket for safekeeping, though you already know you will not lose it. Some invitations get pinned to the bulletin board by the icebox, official and expected, church socials and school recitals. This one feels different, smaller and more personal. An invitation not to an event exactly, but to an evening among women you already know, gathered for a reason you cannot quite picture yet. Later that morning, while the wash is soaking and the beds are made, you find yourself thinking about it again. Thursday is only 3 days away, close enough that you begin, almost without meaning to, considering what you might wear, whether you should bring anything, whether your neighbour will expect polite conversation, or something more like a performance. You've been to enough gatherings in this neighbourhood to know that even the smallest evening carries its own quiet etiquette, its own unspoken rules about who speaks first and who simply nods along. You glance at the card one more time before tucking it away in the kitchen drawer, where you keep recipes and coupons and other small paper reminders of ordinary life. The clip art housewife on the front smiles up at you with her bowl raised high, a gesture that feels almost triumphant, though you cannot yet say why a bowl would deserve such enthusiasm. It is the kind of small mystery that lingers pleasantly in the back of your mind while you go about the rest of your morning, folding towels, sweeping the porch, waving to the mailman as he passes. By afternoon, you mention the invitation to another neighbour over the fence while pinning up laundry, and her face lights up in a way that surprises you. She went to one last month, she says, over at her sister's house across town, and she has not stopped talking about it since. She tells you about a bowl that seals so tightly you could turn it upside down and nothing, not a single drop, would escape. She tells you about a demonstration lady who arrived with a suitcase full of containers in colours you did not know plastic could come in. Soft yellows and gentle greens, colours that somehow made ordinary kitchen storage feel almost cheerful. You listen with growing curiosity, pinning shirts to the line without quite paying attention to the task, your mind already wandering ahead to Thursday evening. There is something comforting in knowing that whatever this Tupperware party turns out to be, you will not be walking into it entirely blind. Other women have gone before you, have come home smiling, have found something in an ordinary living room gathering worth talking about days later over a fence. That evening, you tell your husband about the invitation while setting the table for supper. He raises an eyebrow at the word Tupperware, unfamiliar and slightly foreign sounding to him, and asks what exactly you will be doing there. You admit you're not entirely sure, only that it involves bowls and coffee and the company of women from down the block. He shrugs in the easy way husbands do when a wife's evening plans do not concern him directly, and the conversation moves on to other things. The children's schoolwork, a repair needed on the back porch step. But later, lying in bed with the lights already out, you find yourself thinking of that small cream-coloured card once more, tucked safely in the kitchen drawer. There is something quietly exciting about an invitation whose purpose you cannot fully picture yet. A small unopened door waiting at the end of the week. You close your eyes, and somewhere in the last drowsy moments before sleep, you imagine a room full of pastel bowls catching the lamplight, and a house full of women leaning in close to see what all the fuss is about. It is the kind of small anticipation that feels harder to find now, a simple curiosity about an ordinary Thursday evening, unhurried, and entirely its own. You stand in front of your closet longer than the occasion probably calls for, because in 1954, even an evening among friends in someone's living room deserves a little thought. You settle on a shirtwaist dress in a soft blue, nothing too formal, nothing too plain, the kind of dress that says you tried without saying you tried too hard. You smooth the fabric between your fingers, feeling the crisp cotton give slightly under your touch, and hold it up against the afternoon light coming through the bedroom window. The colour reminds you faintly of a summer sky just after a rain, calm and a little washed out, the kind of blue that photographs well without demanding too much attention. You have worn this dress to church picnics and to visits with your mother, and it has never once looked wrong, which in matters of dress feels like its own quiet virtue. You lay it across the bed and begin considering the smaller decisions that follow, the ones that never quite feel small in the moment. A cardigan, perhaps, in case the evening turns cool, or perhaps just a light shawl draped over your shoulders for the walkover. Your good pair of low-heeled shoes, comfortable enough for standing and sitting through a demonstration, but polished enough to look presentable among neighbours who will surely be dressed with equal care. You open your jewellery box next, sorting through a small collection of pins and earrings that have accumulated over the years, gifts from your husband, hand-me-downs from an aunt, a few pieces bought for yourself on rare occasions when the budget allowed for something purely decorative. You choose a simple pearl drop earring, nothing flashy, the kind of accessory that says you belong in this room without saying you're trying to outshine anyone in it. Your hair takes a little longer than usual tonight. You set it that morning in rollers, the same routine you follow most days, but tonight you take extra care smoothing each curl into place, checking the mirror from more than one angle before deciding it will do. A light dusting of powder, a touch of rouge on your cheeks, a careful line of lipstick in a shade just bold enough to be noticed without looking as though you tried very hard to be noticed at all. You think, briefly, about the other women who will be there tonight. Women you have known for years in the easy, familiar way of neighbours. Women whose kitchens you have visited and whose children have played with yours in the yard. You wonder what they will wear, whether anyone will arrive in something a little too formal, whether anyone will show up looking as though they simply threw something on without a second thought. There is a quiet, unspoken competition in evenings like this, gentle and mostly good-natured, the kind that exists between women who like each other well enough but still notice these things. You slip the dress over your head, feeling the fabric settle comfortably against your shoulders, and turn slowly in front of the mirror to check the fall of the skirt, the way the belt sits at your waist. It looks right. Not too eager, not too plain, exactly the kind of balance an evening like this calls for. Your husband glances up from his newspaper as you walk past the living room and offers the kind of distracted compliment husbands often give, a nod, a murmur that you look nice before returning his attention to the page in front of him. You do not mind. Tonight is not really for him anyway. You check your reflection one final time before gathering your purse and a light sweater for the walk over, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from your skirt out of habit more than necessity. There is something satisfying in this small ritual of preparation, this quiet act of making yourself presentable for an evening that promises very little beyond conversation and coffee and the company of familiar faces. As you step out the front door into the early evening air, you feel the last of the day's warmth still clinging to the sidewalk, the sky beginning its slow slide into dusk. You glance down at your dress once more, satisfied with the choice, and start toward your neighbour's house with the particular lightness that comes from feeling, in some small way, ready. It is a feeling harder to name now, this quiet pride in choosing exactly the right dress for exactly the right evening. But tonight, walking down the sidewalk in the fading light, it feels like its own small accomplishment. The walk to your neighbour's house takes only a few minutes, past lawns still damp from the evening sprinkler and porch lights just beginning to flicker on against the fading gold of the sky. You carry nothing but your purse and a small private curiosity about what exactly a Tupperware party involves, since you have heard the phrase from 3 different women this week alone. The evening air feels soft against your skin, still holding a little of the day's warmth, but cooling gently as the sun continues its slow descent behind the rooftops. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler ticks rhythmically against a fence, and the smell of cut grass drifts faintly on the breeze, mixing with the scent of someone's supper still lingering from an open kitchen window. It is the kind of ordinary evening smell that you barely notice most days, but tonight, walking with a purpose beyond your usual errands, it feels almost worth pausing over. You pass the Hendersons' house first, their porch light already glowing warm and yellow, his shadow moving behind the curtains that might be Mrs. Henderson finishing the supper dishes. Their dog barks once, half-heartedly, more out of habit than real concern, and quiet again as you continue past. Further down, a group of children still linger in someone's front yard, reluctant to give up the last of their play before being called inside for the night, their laughter carrying clearly in the still evening air. You glance at your watch, though you know you have left yourself plenty of time, the kind of careful punctuality that feels important for a first visit to something you do not fully understand yet. You do not want to arrive too early, before your neighbour has finished her own preparations, but you also do not want to arrive last, walking into a room already settled and comfortable without you. The sky continues its slow transformation as you walk, the gold deepening at the edges into something closer to rose, then into a soft violet that will not fully darken for another half hour yet. It is the kind of light that makes even familiar streets look a little different, softer somehow, the ordinary houses you pass every day taking on a gentler, more inviting quality in the fading glow. You think as you walk about the last time you gathered with the women of this neighbourhood for anything beyond a church social or a hurried conversation over the fence. It has been longer than you would like to admit. The business of running a household leaving little room for evenings that exist purely for the pleasure of company. There is something quietly hopeful in tonight's small errand. A reminder that an evening does not need a grand occasion to feel worth dressing for. As you approach your neighbour's house, you notice the folding chairs visible through the front window, arranged in a loose circle around what looks like a card table, and your curiosity sharpens another degree. You climb the 2 steps to her porch, smoothing your skirt one final time, and knock gently on the screen door, hearing already the low murmur of voices and laughter drifting out from inside. Your neighbour appears a moment later, apron still tied around her waist, cheeks slightly flushed from the last-minute rush of preparation, and waves you inside with a particular warmth reserved for a guest who has arrived at exactly the right time. You step across the threshold, leaving the fading evening light behind you, and into a living room already humming with the low, comfortable chatter of women settling into folding chairs. It is the kind of small transition that feels almost ceremonial in its own quiet way. The walk from the ordinary evening outside into the warm, gathered anticipation of the room ahead, ordinary in every practical sense, and yet, somehow, entirely its own. Inside, the furniture has been shifted just enough to make room for folding chairs borrowed from a church basement or a husband's poker night. The coffee table has been pushed against the wall, and in its place sits a card table covered in a lace cloth, holding a curious line-up of pastel containers in every size you can imagine. You pause just inside the doorway for a moment, taking in the small transformation your neighbour has managed in her own living room. The sofa has been pushed back against the far wall to make space, its cushions still holding the faint impression of where the family usually sits in the evenings. In its place, a row of folding chairs stretches in a loose semicircle, mismatched but neatly arranged, some clearly borrowed from the church fellowship hall, their metal legs slightly scuffed from years of potlucks and committee meetings. The lace cloth on the card table catches your eye first, white and delicate, the kind of tablecloth usually reserved for holidays or a minister's visit. It seems almost too fine a setting for what sits on top of it, and yet somehow the pastel containers arranged there, soft yellows and gentle greens and one shade of pink you cannot quite name, look strangely at home against the white lace, like something meant to be displayed rather than simply used. You glance around the rest of the room, noting the small details your neighbour has clearly attended to with care. A vase of fresh cut flowers sits on the mantel, gathered that afternoon from her own garden, judging by the slightly wild arrangement. The lamps have been dimmed just enough to soften the room without darkening it, casting a warm glow over the gathered chairs and the eager faces beginning to fill them. Somewhere in the kitchen you can hear the faint clink of cups being readied, the last preparations before the evening properly begins. The room smells of coffee already brewing and something faintly sweet, perhaps cookies warming in the oven, mixed with the lingering scent of the floor polish your neighbour must have used earlier that day in anticipation of guests. It is the particular smell of a home prepared for company, familiar in its own way, though tonight it carries an added note of anticipation you cannot quite place. You find an open chair near the middle of the semicircle, close enough to see the card table clearly, but not so close as to seem overly eager. The chair creaks slightly as you settle into it, and you smooth your skirt across your knees, glancing around at the other women already seated, some chatting quietly, others simply watching the door for the next arrival. The card table itself draws your eye again and again, an odd centerpiece for a living room otherwise so familiar. The containers are stacked in a way that feels almost deliberate, largest at the back, smallest at the front, colours alternating so that no two similar shades sit too close together. It looks less like a demonstration table and more like a small curated display, the kind you might see in a shop window, though you cannot yet say why a collection of kitchen bowls should be arranged with such evident care. You notice, too, how the rearranged furniture has changed the feeling of the room itself, transforming an ordinary living room into something that feels almost like a small stage. The usual clutter of daily life, the children's toys, the husband's newspaper, has been tucked away somewhere out of sight, leaving only the folding chairs and the card table and the gathered circle of women waiting for whatever comes next. More women arrive in the minutes that follow, each one pausing at the doorway much as you did, taking in the small transformation before finding a seat among the growing circle. Greetings are exchanged in low, warm voices, hands are patted, compliments given on dresses and hairstyles, the easy currency of women who know each other well enough to notice such things without needing to be asked. You find yourself glancing at the card table once more, the pastel containers catching the lamplight in a way that makes them look almost luminous against the white lace beneath them. There is something quietly theatrical about the whole arrangement. A living room reshaped just enough to hold an audience, a card table set like a small altar to whatever this evening intends to reveal. As the last few chairs fill and the room settles into a comfortable hum of conversation, you feel the particular anticipation that comes from sitting in a space deliberately prepared for something you do not yet understand. It is a feeling harder to find in ordinary evenings, this sense of a room transformed, however briefly, into something a little more than its usual self, and you settle back in your chair, ready to see what the evening will bring. You recognize most of the faces already settling into chairs, women from down the block, from the church social, from the grocery store checkout line where you've exchanged nods for years without ever quite becoming friends. Tonight, in this smaller room, that seems likely to change. You catch the eye of Mrs. Callahan first, seated 2 chairs down, a woman you've waved to countless times while retrieving your mail, but never really spoken with beyond the weather and the state of each other's rose bushes. She smiles now with an ease that surprises you, patting the empty chair beside her as though inviting you to sit closer, and you find yourself accepting without quite deciding to, drawn by the small warmth of being noticed. Across the room, you spot the woman from the checkout line at the grocery, the one who always seems to be juggling 2 children and a cart full of groceries with a patience you have long admired from a polite distance. Here, without her children in tow, she looks younger somehow, more relaxed, laughing freely at something the woman beside her has said, her whole face transformed by an ease you have never seen in the fluorescent light of the grocery aisle. You settle into your seat and begin the familiar ritual of catching up, the small exchanges that make up so much of a woman's social life in this neighbourhood. How are the children doing in school? Has the heat been bothering the garden as much as it has bothered yours? Did you hear about the new family moving into the house on the corner? And isn't it strange how quickly a street can change with just one new face added to it? The conversation moves easily between you, the kind of talk that requires no real effort because you have all lived variations of the same days for years now, the same small triumphs and frustrations of running a household, raising children, keeping a marriage steady through the ordinary wear of daily life. There is comfort in this shared rhythm, even among women you would not call close friends, a sense of belonging to something larger than any single conversation. You notice, too, how the smaller setting of the living room seems to draw out a different kind of closeness than you might find at a larger church function or a neighbourhood picnic. There, conversations tend to scatter across dozens of small groups, easily interrupted, easily abandoned for the next person passing by. Here, in this tighter circle of folding chairs, there is nowhere to drift to, no easy escape into a larger crowd, and so the conversations settle deeper, linger longer, taking on a quality of real attention that feels almost rare. Mrs. Callahan leans toward you now, lowering her voice slightly as she asks whether you've been to one of these parties before, and you admit, a little sheepishly, that you have not, that you're here mostly out of curiosity stirred by a fence-line conversation earlier in the week. She laughs warmly at this, assuring you that she felt exactly the same way before her first one, and that by the end of the evening you will likely understand the fuss everyone has been making. Around you, similar small conversations continue, women leaning close to share a laugh, a bit of news, a gentle complaint about a husband's habits or a child's stubbornness. The room fills with the low, comfortable murmur of voices overlapping, punctuated occasionally by a burst of laughter from one corner or another, the particular music of women gathered together with nowhere else they need to be. You find yourself relaxing more than you expected, the earlier curiosity about the evening's purpose softening into something simpler, a quiet enjoyment of the company itself, regardless of what the card table at the front of the room might eventually reveal. It occurs to you that perhaps this, the gathering itself, the easy warmth of women greeting one another after too long apart, might be worth the evening on its own, whatever else follows. It is the kind of closeness harder to find now, this simple pleasure of sitting among neighbours with nothing more urgent to do than talk, and as the last few chairs fill and the room settles into a comfortable hum, you feel glad in a quiet, uncomplicated way that you decided to come. Your neighbour stands at the head of the room with the poise of someone who has rehearsed this moment in front of her bathroom mirror at least twice. She smooths her skirt, clears her throat gently, and welcomes everyone with the warmth of a woman who has made a pot of coffee, borrowed enough chairs, and now intends to enjoy every second of being the centre of attention. The room quiets gradually as she steps forward, the low murmur of conversation fading into an expectant hush, punctuated only by the soft creak of folding chairs as women settle their attention toward her. She stands with her hands clasped lightly in front of her, the posture of someone who has thought carefully about how this moment should look, though there is a slight flush to her cheeks that betrays a nervousness beneath the composed exterior. You watch her take a small breath before beginning, and something in the gesture reminds you of the effort that has clearly gone into this evening, effort that extends well beyond the borrowed chairs and the lace tablecloth. There is the coffee already brewing in the kitchen, the cookies you can still smell faintly from the oven, the careful arrangement of pastel containers on the card table, all of it assembled with a quiet, determined care that speaks to how much this evening means to her. She welcomes everyone by name, or nearly so, pausing once to correct herself with a small, self-deprecating laugh when she confuses two women's names, an error the room forgives easily with warm chuckles of understanding. She thanks everyone for coming on a Thursday evening, acknowledging with a knowing smile that she understands how precious an evening away from supper dishes and children's bedtimes can be, and the room murmurs its agreement, several women nodding along. There is something almost performative in the way she holds herself now, shoulders back, chin lifted slightly, a woman stepping, however briefly, into a role larger than her usual daily life allows. You recognise this transformation because you have seen versions of it before, in women organising church bake sales or leading a scout troop meeting. That particular straightening of posture that comes from being given, for one evening, the undivided attention of a room full of peers. She introduces the evening's purpose next, though carefully, teasingly, promising that what follows will change the way everyone in the room thinks about their own kitchens. She gestures toward the card table behind her, toward the pastel containers still waiting there, and several women lean forward slightly in their chairs, curiosity sharpening now that the evening's true subject has finally been named aloud. You notice the particular pride in her voice as she speaks, the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has taken it upon herself to organise something for the benefit and enjoyment of her neighbours, who has opened her own living room, rearranged her own furniture, and now stands ready to share whatever she has learned or discovered with the women gathered around her. It is a small kind of leadership, modest in scale but not in feeling, and you find yourself admiring the courage it must take to stand at the front of a room full of familiar faces and hold their attention, even for a few borrowed minutes. She mentions, almost as an aside, that she attended a similar gathering herself just a few weeks earlier at a cousin's house across town, and left so impressed that she knew immediately she wanted to host one of her own. There is an infectious quality to her enthusiasm, the kind that makes you lean in a little further, genuinely curious now about whatever transformation a simple plastic bowl might be capable of producing. As she finishes her brief introduction, she glances toward the kitchen doorway, and you follow her gaze to see another woman waiting there, a stranger to the room, holding a large case that must contain the evening's true centerpiece. Your neighbour's smile widens as she gestures the newcomer forward, clearly proud to have arranged this small spectacle for the benefit of everyone gathered here tonight. It is a small moment, really. Just a woman standing at the front of her own living room, welcoming her neighbours and introducing a guest. And yet there is something quietly moving about it. This simple act of hosting, of gathering people together under one roof for an evening of company and curiosity. It is the kind of ordinary ceremony harder to notice in the moment, but easy to look back on fondly. A woman taking her place at the head of the room, ready to share something she believes, in her own small way, might genuinely delight the people she's invited into her home. A woman you have never met steps through the door a few minutes later, carrying a case so large it takes both arms to manage. She introduces herself as the company representative, though everyone in the room will simply call her the Tupperware lady by the end of the night, a title she seems to wear proudly. She moves with the confidence of someone who has walked into dozens of living rooms just like this one, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she makes her way toward the card table at the front of the room. The case she carries looks heavier than her easy stride suggests, its corners slightly worn from travel, stickers, or perhaps small scuffs marking years of similar evenings in similar homes across the county. She sets the case down on the floor beside the card table with a practiced motion, straightening afterward to address the room with a smile that seems to have been perfected through repetition. Warm without being overly familiar, professional without feeling cold. Her dress is neat and simple, well suited to an evening of demonstration rather than pure socializing, and you notice a small pin on her lapel, the company's insignia perhaps, catching the lamplight as she moves. She thanks your neighbour first, complimenting the room's arrangement, the borrowed chairs, the lace tablecloth, with the kind of genuine warmth that suggests she means it rather than simply performing politeness. Your neighbour beams at the compliment, clearly gratified, and you sense the two women have likely spoken more than once already in preparation for this evening, arranging details over the telephone that neither mention to the rest of the gathered guests. The Tupperware lady turns her attention to the room next, introducing herself properly this time, her name slipping past you almost too quickly to catch, though it hardly seems to matter. By the time she opens her case, unlatching it with two brisk clicks that seem to command the room's attention all on their own, everyone has already settled into calling her simply the Tupperware lady, a title that suits her better than any given name could. Inside the case you catch glimpses of more containers than were displayed on the card table, nested carefully inside one another, colours layered like a rainbow folded into itself. She begins unpacking with practiced efficiency, arranging each piece with the same careful symmetry you noticed earlier on the table, largest to smallest, colours alternating in a pattern that seems almost aesthetic in its precision. As she works, she speaks, her voice falling into an easy rhythm clearly worn smooth from repetition, though it does not feel rehearsed so much as comfortable. The voice of someone who genuinely enjoys this particular evening ritual. She asks the room a few friendly questions. How many of you have struggled with a refrigerator full of half-wrapped leftovers? How many of you have thrown away food gone bad simply because nothing sealed properly? And the room responds with a chorus of knowing laughter, several women exchanging glances of shared frustration. You watch her hands as she continues arranging her display, quick and confident, clearly familiar with every item she touches. There is something almost theatrical about her presentation, not insincere, but polished in the way a skilled saleswoman's presentation naturally becomes after enough evenings spent perfecting it. She seems to understand, too, that this evening is as much about the company and the conversation as it is about the products themselves, pausing often to laugh along with the room, to ask after someone's family, to compliment a woman's dress or hairstyle before returning to her display. The room's attention sharpens as she lifts the first container from her case, holding it aloft the way a jeweller might display a particularly fine piece, and you feel the anticipation building around you. Women leaning forward slightly in their folding chairs, curious now to see exactly what all the recent conversation has been about. It is a small performance in its way, this arrival of a stranger into a familiar living room, but there is something genuinely engaging about her presence, a confidence that makes the room trust her almost immediately, and you find yourself, along with everyone else gathered here tonight, waiting eagerly to see what she will show you next. Cups are passed, saucers balanced on knees, and for a few minutes the room fills with the ordinary music of women catching up, whose children are doing what in school, whose husband got a promotion, whose garden did surprisingly well this year despite the heat. Your neighbour moves through the room with a tray of coffee cups, her earlier nervousness having settled now into the comfortable rhythm of hosting, pausing at each chair to offer cream or sugar, exchanging a quick word or two before moving on to the next guest. The coffee smells rich and strong, the kind brewed specifically for company rather than the thinner pot reserved for ordinary weekday mornings, and you wrap your hands gratefully around the warm cup as it is passed to you. The conversation around you settles into the easy, meandering rhythm of women who have known each other, in varying degrees, for years. Mrs. Callahan beside you mentions that her eldest has just started bringing home mathematics homework she can no longer help with, confessing this with a laugh that suggests more relief than embarrassment, and the woman across from her nods knowingly, admitting her own children passed her by academically years ago. Someone mentions her husband's recent promotion at the plant, and the room offers its congratulations warmly, though you notice a faint undertone beneath the enthusiasm, the small private calculations every woman here makes about her own household's fortunes measured quietly against her neighbours'. It is not unkind exactly, just the natural comparison that exists among women who have built their lives so closely alongside one another. The talk turns briefly to gardens, always a reliable subject this time of year. Complaints about the summer's stubborn heat, mixing with quiet pride over a particularly successful crop of tomatoes or a rose bush that has finally, after years of coaxing, begun to bloom properly. You mention your own garden's modest success this season, and the woman beside you offers a knowing nod, sharing a small trick her mother once taught her for keeping the soil properly watered during the hottest weeks. The coffee cups empty slowly as the conversation continues, refilled occasionally by your neighbour as she continues her rounds, clearly enjoying this last stretch of ordinary socialising before the evening's true purpose begins. You notice the Tupperware lady standing quietly near her display table, allowing the room its moment of unhurried conversation, understanding perhaps that a comfortable, relaxed audience makes for a more receptive one once the demonstration finally begins. Someone brings up a recent church social, recounting a small mishap involving a dropped casserole dish that had the whole room laughing within moments, the story growing slightly more dramatic with each retelling, as these stories always do among women who enjoy a good laugh at their own collective expense. You find yourself laughing along, genuinely amused, the tension of walking into an unfamiliar evening having fully dissolved now into simple enjoyment of good company. The conversation drifts, as it often does among neighbours, towards small pieces of local news, a new family moving in down the street, a rumour about the corner grocery possibly expanding, a mention of an upcoming church rummage sale that several women agree they must attend. There is comfort in this kind of talk, the small currency of a close-knit neighbourhood, news exchanged not out of idle gossip but out of genuine investment in the lives unfolding around you. You glance around the room now, taking in the warm scene before you. Women settled comfortably in borrowed folding chairs, coffee cups balanced carefully on knees, laughter rising and falling in easy waves around the room. It occurs to you that evenings like this, ordinary as they might seem, carry their own quiet importance. A chance for women whose days are largely spent tending to households and children to simply sit together, unhurried, and enjoy one another's company. As the coffee cups finally empty and the conversation begins to naturally quiet, you sense the room shifting its attention, almost imperceptibly, back toward the card table at the front, toward the Tupperware lady who's been waiting patiently through this small interlude of socializing. The anticipation from earlier returns, gentler now, warmed by the easy comfort of conversation, and you settle back in your chair ready for whatever comes next. It is the kind of unhurried evening harder to find now. Coffee and small talk stretching pleasantly before the main event. No one rushing toward the next thing, content simply to sit together a little longer before the demonstration finally begins. The Tupperware lady lifts a bowl from her case with the ceremony of a magician revealing a dove, holding it up so the lamplight catches its pastel sheen. She explains, in a voice practiced smooth from dozens of living rooms just like this one, that what you are looking at will change the way you store leftovers forever. The room settles into an attentive hush as she holds the bowl aloft, turning it slowly so that every angle catches the light, the soft yellow plastic glowing almost warm under the lamp's glow. It is a simple thing, really. Just a round bowl with a curved lid resting loosely atop it, and yet the way she presents it, with such evident pride, makes it feel like something worth this careful attention. She begins by describing the material itself, running her thumb along the smooth curve of the bowl's side, explaining that this is no ordinary plastic, nothing like the brittle, cloudy containers some of you might remember from wartime rationing days, thin and prone to cracking after only a few uses. This, she says, is different, flexible enough to bend slightly under pressure without breaking, sturdy enough to last years with proper care. You lean forward slightly in your chair, along with several other women around you, studying the bowl as she continues her description. There is something almost hypnotic in the way she handles it, confident and practiced, each gesture clearly refined through countless similar evenings. She points out the slight give in the plastic when she presses her thumb against its side, demonstrating a flexibility that seems almost impossible for something meant to hold its shape reliably. Mrs. Callahan beside you murmurs something under her breath about the colour, admiring the soft yellow shade, and you find yourself agreeing silently. The bowl's pastel tone somehow more appealing than the plain white or clear glass containers currently occupying your own kitchen shelves. There is a cheerfulness to the colour, a small brightness that seems designed to make an otherwise mundane kitchen task feel a little more pleasant. The Tupperware lady continues, mentioning that this particular size is one of the most popular in the entire collection, versatile enough for storing anything from leftover vegetables to a portion of tomorrow's lunch, small enough to fit easily on a refrigerator shelf without crowding out other items. She speaks with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believes in what she is selling, her voice rising slightly with each new detail, drawing the room further into her small performance. You find your mind drifting briefly to your own kitchen, to the mismatched collection of jars and bowls currently stacked haphazardly in your cabinets, none of them quite fitting together, none of them sealing quite the way you would like. The bowl she holds now looks nothing like anything you currently own, and something in you, quiet but insistent, begins to wonder what it might feel like to have a full set of containers that actually matched, that actually worked the way they were meant to. She sets the bowl down gently on the card table now, careful not to disturb the careful arrangement of other containers still waiting their turn, and reaches instead for the lid, holding it up separately so the room can see its shape more clearly. The lid, she explains, is the true secret of the design, curved just so to create what she calls a proper seal, something no ordinary container lid has quite managed to achieve before. The room watches with genuine curiosity now, several women exchanging glances that suggest a shared skepticism mixed with hope, the kind of cautious optimism that comes from having been disappointed by household products before. Wax paper that never quite covers properly, lids that never quite fit the bowls they were sold with. You sense the room waiting to see if this bowl might actually deliver on the promise being made so confidently in front of you. She holds the lid over the bowl now, positioning it carefully, and pauses for just a moment before pressing it into place, drawing out the small suspense of the demonstration with the practiced patience of someone who understands the value of a well-timed pause. The room leans forward almost imperceptibly, waiting. You notice, watching her hands move with such assured precision, that there is something almost reassuring about her confidence, the way she handles this ordinary object with such evident belief in its usefulness. It occurs to you that perhaps this is part of what makes an evening like this worthwhile. Not simply the container itself, but the small permission it offers to believe that an ordinary daily frustration, spoiled leftovers, ill-fitting lids, might actually have a solution waiting for it. The lamplight continues to catch the soft yellow plastic as she holds the sealed bowl aloft once more, turning it slowly for the room to admire, and you feel your earlier curiosity sharpening now into something closer to genuine interest. Whatever this evening turns out to hold, you sense already that you will be leaving with more than just pleasant memories of coffee and conversation. It is the kind of quiet anticipation harder to find now. A room full of women genuinely curious about something as ordinary as a plastic bowl, waiting together to see what happens next. She presses the lid down, and a small sound escapes, a soft exhale of air that makes several women in the room laugh in surprise. She calls it burping the bowl, and something about the phrase, the simplicity of it, makes the whole room feel suddenly unexpectedly delighted. The sound catches everyone off guard, a quick, soft hiss of air escaping from beneath the lid's edge as she presses it firmly into place, and the laughter that follows ripples through the room in an instant, genuine and a little startled. You find yourself laughing along with the others, surprised by how such a small, unremarkable sound could produce such immediate delight among a room full of grown women. The Tupperware lady laughs along with everyone else, clearly pleased by the reaction, though you suspect she has seen this exact response unfold in dozens of living rooms before tonight. She repeats the demonstration once more, slowly this time, lifting the lid slightly and pressing it down again so the room can watch more carefully. the small burst of air escaping again with that same soft, satisfying sound. Someone across the room asks, half laughing, whether that little burp means the bowl is working properly, and the Tupperware lady nods enthusiastically, explaining that the sound is precisely the proof everyone is looking for, evidence that the seal has formed correctly, trapping the air inside just as it will later trap the freshness of whatever food the bowl might hold. It is a simple explanation, but delivered with such conviction that the room seems entirely convinced. She invites the room closer now, gesturing for the bowl to be passed from hand to hand so everyone might feel the demonstration for themselves rather than simply watching from a distance. Mrs. Callahan receives it first, turning the bowl over curiously in her hands before pressing the lid down herself, producing her own small burst of air and her own delighted laugh, the sound catching the whole room's attention once more. You watch as the bowl travels slowly around the circle of folding chairs, each woman taking her turn testing the seal, some pressing too hard and laughing at the more emphatic hiss that results, others pressing gently and marvelling quietly at how such a small gesture could produce something so satisfying. There is a genuine, uncomplicated joy in watching this simple object pass from hand to hand, each woman discovering the same small delight in turn. The Tupperware lady continues speaking as the bowl makes its rounds, explaining a little more about the design, how the curved lip of the lid creates an airtight seal when pressed correctly, how this same principle applies to every container in her collection, regardless of size. She mentions, almost as an aside, that this small burping sound has become something of a signature for the whole line of products, a detail customers often mention fondly even months after their first demonstration. When the bowl finally reaches your hands, you turn it over slowly, studying the lid's curved edge the way the others have, feeling the smooth plastic beneath your fingers. You press the lid down carefully, and the small hiss of escaping air catches you by surprise, despite having watched it happen a dozen times already tonight, drawing an involuntary laugh from you that joins the general warmth already filling the room. There is something quietly wonderful, you think, in how such a small, ordinary sound can produce such shared delight among a room full of women who have gathered here for nothing more than an evening of company and curiosity. It is not a grand discovery, not a life-altering revelation, just a simple, satisfying little sound that somehow manages to bring an entire room together in a moment of genuine, unguarded laughter. You pass the bowl along to the next woman beside you, watching as the small ritual continues around the circle, each new burst of air met with the same warm laughter, the same small delight repeating itself again and again without losing any of its charm. The Tupperware lady watches with evident satisfaction, clearly pleased that her small demonstration has landed exactly as she hoped it would. As the bowl completes its circuit around the room and finally returns to the card table, you glance around at the gathered faces, all still smiling faintly from the shared moment, and feel a small, unexpected warmth settle over you. Whatever else this evening holds, you suspect you will remember this particular moment fondly. The simple, shared pleasure of a room full of neighbours delighting together in something as small and ordinary as the soft sound of air escaping from a sealed plastic bowl. It is the kind of small, uncomplicated joy harder to find now. A room full of women laughing together over something so simple, so easily overlooked, and yet somehow, tonight, entirely worth the laughter it receives. The bowl travels from hand to hand around the circle, each woman turning it over, pressing the lid, testing the seal with the seriousness of an appraiser handling something valuable. You take your turn, feeling the surprising lightness of the plastic, the satisfying click when the lid locks into place. You're struck, holding it, by how little it weighs compared to the glass and ceramic dishes lining your own cupboards at home. Containers that always seem to demand 2 hands and a careful step whenever you move them from shelf to counter. This bowl rests easily in one palm, light enough that you could almost forget you're holding anything at all, and yet there is a solidity to it too, a sense that it would not crack if it slipped from your grip onto the kitchen floor the way your good mixing bowl did last winter, shattering into pieces you were still finding behind the icebox weeks later. Beside you, a woman named Dorothy, whom you know mostly from the church choir, turns the bowl over slowly in her hands before passing it along, murmuring that she cannot get over how the colour has stayed so bright, no fading, no dullness the way plastic sometimes takes on after time in a sunny window. You nod along, though you've not owned anything quite like this before to compare it to, only the memory of brittle wartime substitutes that cracked and yellowed within a season. The bowl continues its slow journey around the circle, and you notice how each woman seems to develop her own small ritual with it, some pressing the lid firmly and listening for the hiss with obvious satisfaction, others turning it over first to examine the bottom, checking for seams or weak points the way you might inspect a bolt of fabric before committing to a dress pattern. There is something almost communal in this shared inspection, a room full of practical women applying their household instincts to an object none of them has quite encountered before tonight. You catch snippets of conversation drifting around the bowl's path, comments exchanged in low voices between the women seated closest to one another. Someone mentions that her sister back in Ohio already owns a full set and swears by it for keeping bread fresh through the week. Another admits, almost sheepishly, that she's been eyeing the smaller size specifically for her husband's lunch pail, tired of wrapping his sandwich in wax paper that never quite holds its shape by midday. The Tupperware lady watches this circulation with visible patience, allowing the room its time to handle and consider the item without rushing toward her next point. She answers a question here and there when someone raises a hand, mostly about care and cleaning, whether the bowls can go in hot dishwater without warping, whether the colours will hold up after repeated washing. Her answers come easily, confident and specific, the kind of detail that suggests genuine familiarity with the product rather than a memorised script. When the bowl reaches Mrs. Callahan again after its full circuit, she holds it a moment longer than necessary, clearly still turning something over in her mind, before finally setting it back down on the card table with a small decisive nod, as though she has already made up her mind about something. You notice this small gesture, and wonder if you're witnessing the quiet moment before a decision, the instant just before a woman decides she will be ordering one for herself before the evening is through. You think, watching the bowl finally come to rest, about how differently an object can be received once it has passed through many hands rather than simply been observed from a distance. There is a kind of trust built in that circulation, a room full of women each offering their own small verdict through the careful way they handle something new, and by the time the bowl has made its way fully around the circle, it feels less like a stranger's product, and more like something already halfway belonging to the room itself. The conversation around you shifts naturally now toward comparisons. Women recalling containers they have used for years, tin canisters passed down from mothers, glass jars saved from store-bought preserves, wooden boxes lined with cloth for keeping bread. Each memory offered feels like a small piece of household history, the accumulated practical wisdom of women who have spent years finding whatever solutions were available to them, however imperfect those solutions might have been. You glance down at your own hands, still faintly recalling the weight and shape of the bowl you held a few minutes earlier, and find yourself already imagining where such a container might live in your own kitchen. What leftover dish might finally have a proper home rather than being wrapped haphazardly and hoped for the best. It is a small, practical daydream, but a pleasant one, the kind that settles comfortably alongside the easy warmth of the evening itself. It is the kind of shared, quiet consideration harder to find now. A room full of neighbours passing something new between them, each taking her own careful measure before deciding, together and separately, what she believes it might be worth. The Tupperware lady suggests a small game, something involving passing a container while music plays, or guessing how much liquid a bowl will hold before it spills. Nobody expected to be playing games tonight, but the laughter that follows suggests nobody minds. She explains the rules with an easy, practiced enthusiasm, asking your neighbour if there might be a radio nearby they could use. And within moments the household's small tabletop radio has been carried in from the kitchen and set on the mantel, filling the room with the tinny, cheerful strains of a popular tune. The women exchange amused glances, some clearly delighted by the unexpected turn toward playfulness, others looking faintly self-conscious at the idea of playing a parlour game at their age in front of neighbours no less. The rules, once explained, turn out to be simple enough. A bowl passed quickly from hand to hand around the circle while the music plays, and whoever holds it the moment the radio falls silent must answer a small question or attempt a silly little task guessing the bowl's capacity perhaps, or naming 3 uses for it beyond the obvious one of storing leftovers. It is the kind of gentle, low-stakes game more often reserved for children's birthday parties, and yet somehow, transplanted into this room full of grown women, it takes on its own particular charm. The music begins, and the bowl starts its circuit, passed quickly from hand to hand with a nervous energy that makes several women laugh, even before the radio falls silent for the first time. When it does stop quite suddenly, the bowl lands in the hands of a woman near the far end of the circle, and the room erupts into laughter and gentle teasing as she is asked to guess how many cups of water the bowl might hold before overflowing. She guesses too low, prompting groans of mock disappointment, and the Tupperware lady reveals the correct answer with obvious delight, using the moment to point out once more the bowl's generous but deceiving capacity, larger inside than its modest exterior might suggest. The room laughs again, this time at the small surprise of the correct number, several women shaking their heads in genuine astonishment. The game continues for another round or two, the radio starting and stopping at unpredictable intervals, while the bowl travels quickly around the circle, passed with increasing speed and increasing laughter as the women grow more comfortable with the small silliness of the exercise. You find yourself gripping the bowl a little too tightly when it lands briefly in your own hands, laughing along with the rest of the room when the music stops just as you receive it, leaving you to stammer through a hurried guess of your own. There is something loosening about this small game, you notice. A room full of women who arrived tonight in careful dresses and composed expressions, now laughing freely, some nearly doubled over at a particularly wrong guess, others clapping along cheerfully as the bowl makes its rapid rounds. The earlier formality of the evening, the polite introductions, the careful demonstration, has given way now to something looser and more genuinely joyful. Your neighbour, watching from near the kitchen doorway, looks visibly pleased by how the evening has unfolded, her earlier nervousness as hostess having long since given way to simple enjoyment of watching her living room fill with unguarded laughter. It occurs to you that this might be exactly what she hoped for when she first tucked that cream-coloured invitation under your sugar bowl. Not simply a sales demonstration, but an evening where her neighbours might genuinely enjoy themselves together. The Tupperware lady lets the game run its course for a few more rounds before gently steering the room back toward the demonstration table, though the loosened, easy atmosphere the game created lingers pleasantly even as attention shifts. Several women are still smiling, still exchanging small comments about their own guesses, the earlier reserve of the evening having softened considerably into something warmer and more genuinely companionable. It is the kind of simple, unexpected delight harder to find now, a room full of grown women given permission, however briefly, to laugh together over something as small and silly as guessing how much water a plastic bowl might hold, and finding in that laughter a closeness that no amount of polite conversation could have produced quite so quickly. Conversation drifts naturally toward the kitchen, toward the iceboxes and refrigerators sitting at home right now, half filled with food wrapped in wax paper or foil that never quite seals the way you want it to. Several women admit almost sheepishly that they have thrown away more spoiled leftovers than they would like to count. The subject arrives gently, prompted by an offhand comment from the Tupperware lady about how much food a household might save over the course of a year with proper storage, and the room seems to settle into this new direction with the particular ease of women discussing a problem they have all quietly struggled with for years without ever quite naming it aloud together. Dorothy admits first, laughing at her own expense, that she once discovered a container of stew so forgotten in the back of her icebox that she could no longer identify what it had originally been. The confession opened something in the room, and soon several women are offering their own small admissions. A roast wrapped too loosely that dried out within a day, a bowl of leftover vegetables left uncovered that absorbed the smell of the onions beside it, until neither was fit to eat, a jar of preserves that somehow let in just enough air to spoil weeks before it should have. Each story draws its own small chorus of sympathetic laughter, the recognition of shared frustration binding the room together more closely than the earlier game managed on its own. You find yourself thinking of your own icebox, the crowded shelf where mismatched bowls and jars sit stacked precariously, none of them quite fitting the shape of the space allotted to them, wax paper crinkled loosely over anything without a proper lid, foil reused until it tears too thin to serve its purpose any longer. It has always simply been the way things are managed, an accepted inefficiency you have never much questioned, the same way you have never questioned the effort of resetting your hair each morning or scrubbing the front step every Saturday. The Tupperware lady listens to these shared confessions with evident sympathy, nodding along, occasionally offering a small anecdote of her own from a previous evening's demonstration. Another woman's story of spoiled food or an ill-fitting lid that failed at exactly the wrong moment. She seems genuinely to understand the particular frustration being described, not simply reciting a sales pitch, but engaging with a real, ordinary household struggle that clearly touches every woman in the room in some familiar way. Someone mentions, half joking, that her husband has taken to complaining about the smell of onions lingering in the icebox no matter what she tries, and the room laughs knowingly, several other women nodding in the immediate recognition of the exact same domestic grievance. It is a small, universal frustration, apparently, this particular battle against smells and spoilage that seems to unite households across the entire neighbourhood, regardless of how carefully each woman manages her own kitchen. The conversation continues in this vein for several minutes, women trading small tips and complaints in equal measure. The practical wisdom of years spent managing a household, finding its natural outlet in this comfortable, familiar exchange. You listen more than you speak, finding a quiet interest in hearing how other women have navigated the same small daily challenges you face in your own kitchen, the shared struggle somehow making your own frustrations feel less like a personal failing and more like simply the ordinary condition of keeping house in this particular era. The Tupperware lady eventually steers the conversation gently back toward her display, using the momentum of the room's shared frustration to point once more toward the pastel containers still arranged carefully on the card table, suggesting that perhaps this collective struggle with spoiled leftovers and ill-fitting lids might finally have found its solution. The timing feels natural rather than forced, the room already primed by its own confessions to consider whatever she might offer next with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. You glance toward the card table again, seeing the bowls now with a slightly different eye than before, no longer simply curious objects passed around for entertainment, but potential answers to a frustration you have quietly carried for years without ever quite articulating it so plainly. It is a small shift in perspective, but a meaningful one, the kind that turns idle curiosity into something closer to genuine consideration. It is the kind of shared, unhurried honesty harder to find now, a room full of women admitting their small domestic failures to one another without embarrassment, finding in that shared confession both comfort and, perhaps, the beginning of a genuine solution. The Tupperware lady leans into this moment, gently reminding everyone that a proper seal means the difference between a refrigerator smelling of onions for a week and one that smells of nothing at all. It is a small promise, but in this room, tonight, it feels like something close to relief. She holds up another container now, slightly larger than the first, turning it in the lamplight so the room can see clearly how the lid fits snugly against the rim. No visible gap, no loose edge where air might slip through unnoticed. She explains, patiently and without exaggeration, exactly how the seal works. The careful engineering behind what looks, at first glance, like nothing more than an ordinary plastic lid. The room listens with the particular attention of women who have just spent several minutes confessing their own small failures with spoiled food and lingering smells, each word from the Tupperware lady now landing with the weight of a genuine solution rather than simply a sales pitch. She mentions, almost gently, that she understands how tiring it can be to open an icebox each morning, uncertain whether last night's supper has survived the hours since it was put away, uncertain whether the smell that greets you will be appetizing or apologetic. Dorothy, beside you, murmurs quietly that she cannot remember the last time she opened her own icebox without a small flicker of dread. The kind of quiet, low-grade worry so familiar it barely registers as worry anymore. Simply the accepted condition of managing a household kitchen. Several women nod at this, the recognition passing silently between them, the shared understanding of a frustration too ordinary to complain about loudly, but too persistent to ignore entirely. The Tupperware lady continues, describing how a properly sealed container can keep food fresh for days longer than the household's current methods allow, how a roast wrapped and stored correctly might still taste nearly as good on its third day as its first, how vegetables kept in a sealed bowl rather than loose on a shelf resist the wilting and browning that seems otherwise inevitable by midweek. Each claim she makes lands with quiet weight, in a room full of women who have spent years accepting exactly the opposite as simply the nature of things. You find yourself thinking again of your own kitchen, the small, quiet losses that accumulate there week after week, a bit of meat gone slightly grey at the edges before it can be used, a portion of vegetables softened past their prime, the modest waste that never feels large enough on any single day to worry over, but that surely adds up, over months and years, into something considerably larger than you have ever paused to calculate. The promise being offered tonight feels, in this light, less like an exaggerated sales claim and more like a genuine practical relief, the kind of small domestic improvement that might not change your life in any dramatic way, but could meaningfully ease one of its quieter, more persistent burdens. There is something almost moving in this realization, the idea that an ordinary evening spent among neighbours might actually yield something of real, lasting use. The Tupperware lady sets the container down now, resting her hand lightly atop its lid, and glances around the room with the confident, patient expression of someone who has watched this particular realization dawn on dozens of rooms before tonight. She does not press the point further, allowing the promise to settle quietly into the gathered women's minds rather than pushing toward an immediate decision. You notice several women glancing toward the order sheet still resting near the edge of the card table, though no one reaches for it yet, the room content for now simply to sit with this new, quietly hopeful possibility a little longer before moving toward any final decisions. It is the kind of patient anticipation that feels entirely suited to an evening built as much around companionship as commerce. It is the kind of small, genuine relief harder to find now, a simple promise offered gently among neighbours, the quiet hope that an ordinary daily frustration might finally, after so many years of simply enduring it, have found its solution. You think of your own kitchen cabinets, the mismatched bowls with no lids, the coffee cans repurposed for flour, the bread wrapped in a dish towel and hoped for the best. Next to what is displayed on the card table tonight, your kitchen suddenly feels a little behind the times. You picture it clearly now, standing in your mind's eye the way you have stood in it 1,000 mornings before. The cabinet door that never quite closes properly because of the stack of odd-sized bowls crowded behind it. The coffee can with its label half peeled away, now serving as a flour bin because the proper canister cracked years ago and was never replaced. None of it has ever seemed particularly wanting before tonight. Simply the ordinary accumulation of a household managed as best it can be with whatever happens to be on hand. The bread situation troubles you more than you expected it might, now that you think of it directly. You wrap the loaf each morning in a clean dish towel, tucking the ends under as best you can, though by the second or third day the crust has usually gone hard at the exposed edges, no matter how carefully you fold the fabric. You've simply accepted this as the nature of bread, the way a loaf inevitably stales a little faster than you would prefer, never quite considering that the fault might lie with the storage rather than the bread itself. Dorothy leans toward you, following your gaze toward the card table, and admits quietly that she has been doing the same thing with her own bread for years, wrapped in whatever cloth happens to be clean, sometimes a dish towel, sometimes an old flour sack cut down for the purpose. She laughs a little at the admission, though there is a genuine note of surprise beneath the laugh, the recognition that perhaps this small daily inconvenience was never actually necessary in the first place. You think, too, of the coffee cans lining your pantry shelf. 3 of them now, each holding a different dry good, flour in one, sugar in another, a mix of odd beans and lentils in the third, their original paper labels faded and peeling, replaced in your own memory rather than on the tin itself. They have always served their purpose well enough, sturdy and free, repurposed rather than purchased, and yet set against the smooth, matching pastel containers on display tonight. They suddenly look exactly like what they are, a patched-together solution rather than a proper one. The mismatched bowls trouble you least of all, if only because you have simply stopped noticing them, the way you stop noticing any small imperfection lived alongside for long enough. Some have lids, most do not, and the ones that do rarely match the bowl they were originally sold with, borrowed instead from some other forgotten dish entirely, pressed into service out of necessity rather than proper fit. You've grown so accustomed to this small daily improvisation that it has never once occurred to you to imagine an alternative. Looking now at the card table, at the neat rows of containers stacked in careful, matching sets, you feel something shift slightly in your understanding of your own kitchen, not embarrassment exactly, but a quiet, dawning awareness that perhaps the small inefficiencies you have long accepted were never actually inevitable. There is comfort in this awareness too, strangely, the sense that a solution might exist for something you had never thought to name as a problem in the first place. Around you, other women seem to be arriving at similar small realizations, murmuring quietly to one another about their own coffee cans and dish towels and mismatched bowls, the shared recognition passing gently through the room. It is not a competitive comparison, not quite, but something softer, a collective acknowledgement that perhaps all of you have simply been making do for longer than necessary, patching together solutions from whatever happened to be available rather than choosing something built specifically for the purpose. The Tupperware lady, watching this quiet ripple of recognition move through the room, does not press the point further, allowing the comparison to settle naturally into each woman's own thinking rather than pushing the observation herself. She simply continues arranging her display, confident that the room's own reflection on its current kitchen habits will do more to persuade than any direct sales argument could manage. You glance once more at the coffee cans and mismatched bowls in your mind, then back at the neat pastel rows on the card table, and feel the beginning of a decision forming somewhere beneath your earlier curiosity. Not urgent, not yet fully formed, but present now in a way it had not been when you first walked through your neighbour's door this evening. It is the kind of quiet, ordinary reckoning harder to notice until a room full of matching containers holds it up plainly beside your own kitchen's patched-together arrangements, and you find yourself, however gently, wanting something a little better than what you have simply grown used to. Someone finally asks the question everyone has been wondering quietly since the case first opened. How much does one of these actually cost? The Tupperware lady answers smoothly, mentioning sets and bundles, and you find yourself doing quiet arithmetic in your head, weighing want against need in the gentle way women have always done at kitchen tables. The question comes from near the back of the circle, asked with the particular bluntness of a woman past the age of pretending such details do not matter, and the room seems almost to exhale collectively, relieved that someone else has finally voiced the practical concern that has been quietly forming in the back of every mind since the demonstration began. The Tupperware lady does not flinch at the question, clearly accustomed to it arriving exactly at this point in the evening. She begins by explaining the various sets available, a starter collection with 2 or 3 basic bowls, a more complete set that includes several sizes along with a specialty container or 2, and finally a full collection that would replace nearly everything currently occupying a household's icebox shelves. Each option comes with its own price, spoken plainly and without apology. The numbers settling into the room with a particular weight that money always carries in conversations otherwise centered on pleasure and company. You do the arithmetic quietly in your own mind, the way you have learned to do over years of managing a household budget stretched carefully across groceries and children's shoes and the occasional small indulgence. The starter set feels manageable, close enough to what you might spend on a nice pair of stockings or a new hat for church, the kind of expense easily justified without much discussion needed with your husband. The larger sets give you more pause, numbers that would require a conversation, a small negotiation over what else might need to wait another month. Around you, other women seem caught in similar private calculations, several faces tightening slightly in concentration, lips moving faintly as though running their own household numbers silently against the prices just given. Dorothy beside you murmurs that she had hoped it might be a little less, though she says it without real disappointment. More the reflexive comment of a woman accustomed to weighing every purchase against a dozen competing needs. The Tupperware lady, watching this quiet calculation ripple through the room, offers gently that many of the women she's met on previous evenings have chosen to start small, purchasing just 1 or 2 pieces rather than commit into a full set all at once, allowing the household to grow its collection gradually as budget and need allow. This suggestion seems to ease some of the visible tension in the room, several women's shoulders relaxing slightly at the reminder that this evening does not demand an all-or-nothing decision. You think of your own kitchen again, the coffee cans and mismatched bowls you considered so plainly just minutes ago, and weigh the modest cost of the starter set against the quiet, accumulated frustration of years spent making do with whatever happened to be on hand. It does not feel like an extravagant purchase when framed this way, more like a small practical investment in the ordinary daily rhythm of your household. No different really from replacing a worn-out mixing spoon or finally buying a proper ironing board after years of using the kitchen table instead. The conversation around the price continues for a few more minutes, women asking small clarifying questions, whether payment might be arranged in installments, whether the sets could be customized to include specific sizes rather than the standard combinations offered. The Tupperware lady answers each question patiently, clearly practiced in navigating exactly this kind of careful, considered decision-making that so often accompanies any household purchase of real consequence. You notice, watching the room settle gradually from its initial hesitation into something more like quiet consideration, how naturally this kind of careful financial deliberation unfolds among women who have spent years learning to stretch a household budget as far as it will reasonably go. There is no embarrassment in the careful arithmetic being done around you, only the practical, unhurried consideration that any reasonable purchase deserves. By the time the price discussion begins to wind down, you sense that several women in the room have already quietly settled on their own decisions, some choosing to wait, others already mentally selecting which modest set might fit most comfortably into this month's budget. The earlier uncertainty has given way to something calmer now. The practical clarity that comes once a number has finally been spoken aloud and measured honestly against what a household can bear. It is the kind of quiet, careful reckoning harder to notice from the outside. A room full of women weighing pleasure against practicality, with the same patient seriousness they might bring to any other household decision, and finding gradually their own comfortable answer. When the order sheet finally comes around, you hesitate only a moment before writing down your name beside a modest set. 2 bowls and a set of lids in a shade of green that matches nothing in your kitchen, and somehow still feels exactly right. The sheet arrives in your hands, passed along from Dorothy, who's already signed her own name in a neat, careful hand beside a slightly larger selection than you had expected her to choose. Her earlier hesitation about the price apparently resolved sometime during the last few minutes of quiet conversation. You glance briefly at her entry before turning your attention to the blank line waiting just below it, the paper slightly creased now from having travelled already halfway around the circle of folding chairs. You hold the pencil a moment longer than necessary, running through your earlier calculations one final time, weighing the modest cost against the quiet satisfaction you felt earlier, holding that first bowl in your hands, feeling its surprising lightness, hearing the small, satisfying hiss of its properly sealed lid. It does not take long for the decision to settle firmly enough to commit to paper, the earlier uncertainty of the evening having given way gradually to something closer to quiet confidence. You choose the 2-bowl set, modest but sufficient for what your kitchen most immediately needs, and pause over the colour selection printed neatly along the order sheet's edge. The green catches your eye immediately, a soft, gentle shade unlike anything currently occupying your cabinets, and though it matches nothing else in your kitchen, you find yourself drawn to it anyway, perhaps precisely because it promises something a little different from the tired, mismatched collection you have grown so accustomed to overlooking. You write your name carefully in the space provided, your own handwriting looking slightly more deliberate than usual, as though the small act of committing pencil to paper carries more weight than the modest purchase probably warrants. Beside your name, you note the chosen set and colour, the total cost tallied neatly at the edge of the sheet, a number you have already measured comfortably against this month's budget during the earlier discussion. Passing the sheet along to the woman beside you, you feel a small, unexpected satisfaction settle over you. not simply at the purchase itself, modest as it is, but at the quiet decisiveness of having made it. There is something satisfying in translating an evening's curiosity into a concrete practical choice, the kind of small decision that will, in a few weeks' time, arrive at your door in a neatly wrapped package and take its place, finally, properly, in your own kitchen cabinets. You glance around the room now, watching the sheet continue its slow circulation, each woman pausing over it in turn, some writing quickly and confidently, others hesitating longer, murmuring quietly with a neighbour before finally committing their own choice to paper. The room's earlier collective uncertainty about price has resolved itself, it seems, into a dozen small individual decisions, each woman arriving at her own comfortable answer in her own time. Dorothy leans toward you again, glancing at your entry on the sheet before it moves along, and comments approvingly on the green you have chosen, admitting she nearly selected the same shade herself before settling on a soft yellow instead. There is a small, companionable pleasure in this exchange, the shared experience of having each made a modest, considered choice tonight, different in its particulars but similar in the quiet care behind it. You think, watching the order sheet continue its journey around the remaining chairs, of the package that will eventually arrive at your own front door, imagining briefly the moment you will finally unwrap it and find a place for the new bowls among your kitchen's existing mismatched collection. It is a small anticipation, but a genuine one, the kind of quiet expectation that makes an ordinary week ahead feel just slightly brighter than it otherwise might. The Tupperware lady collects the completed sheet eventually, glancing over the various entries with evident satisfaction, thanking the room warmly for its interest and assuring everyone that orders will typically arrive within a few weeks' time. The room offers its own murmured thanks in return, several women already discussing between themselves how they might arrange their own kitchens once the new containers finally arrive. It is the kind of small, satisfying decision harder to notice as significant in the moment. A modest purchase settled quietly among neighbours, and yet carrying with it the quiet promise of some small lasting improvement to the ordinary daily rhythm of a household kitchen. With the demonstration portion finished, the evening softens into something looser, more familiar. Coffee cups are refilled, someone brings out a plate of cookies, and the conversation turns to husbands, children, the price of groceries, all the ordinary threads that make up a woman's evening among other women. Your neighbour moves through the room once more with a fresh pot of coffee, her earlier hostess nervousness having fully dissolved now into simple, easy warmth, refilling cups without needing to be asked, pausing here and there to exchange a quiet word with whichever guest happens to be nearest. The cookies she brings out, arranged on a plate you recognise from her own everyday dishes rather than anything more formal, disappear quickly among the gathered women, passed hand to hand along with easy compliments on their flavour and texture. The Tupperware lady has begun quietly packing away her remaining display, though she lingers still near the edge of the room, occasionally drawn into the looser conversation now unfolding around her. No longer the evening's central focus, but a welcome, familiar presence among the gathered neighbours. She accepts a cookie herself when offered, laughing along at whatever comment prompted the room's latest burst of amusement. The conversation, freed now from its earlier structure, wanders comfortably from subject to subject, the way conversation among close neighbours always eventually does. Someone mentions a husband's recent complaint about the price of gasoline, prompting a round of similar grievances from around the room, each woman offering her own small complaint about the household budget's ever-tightening margins, groceries costing a little more each month than the month before, a child's shoes needing replacing sooner than expected. Dorothy laughs about her husband's recent attempt at repairing the back porch step himself, rather than calling a proper repairman, the story growing more elaborate with each detail she adds. ending in a small domestic disaster that has the whole room laughing warmly along with her. Another woman offers her own similar story, a husband's confident but ultimately unsuccessful attempt at fixing a leaking faucet, and the conversation settles for a while into a comfortable string of such small domestic comedies, each woman contributing her own. You find yourself laughing more freely now than you have in weeks, the earlier formality of the evening's demonstration having given way entirely to this looser, warmer kind of gathering, women simply enjoying one another's company without any particular agenda, beyond the pleasure of shared conversation. It occurs to you that evenings like this, unstructured and easy, are perhaps rarer in your usual routine than you had realized. Most of your days filled instead with the steady, solitary rhythm of managing a household largely on your own. The talk turns briefly to children, a subject that never seems to exhaust itself among women gathered together, each offering some small story of a recent triumph or trial, a child finally mastering long division, another struggling still with reading despite extra attention at home. There is comfort in these shared stories too, the quiet reassurance that comes from realizing your own household's small struggles are hardly unique, that every woman in this room navigates similar daily challenges in her own way. Someone mentions a recent sale at the grocery on canned goods, prompting a brief but genuinely useful exchange of practical advice, which brands hold up best, which cuts of meat offer the most value for a growing family's appetite. It is the kind of small, practical knowledge women trade easily among themselves, built from years of careful household management, freely shared without any sense of competition or reluctance. You glance around the room now, taking in the warm, easy scene before you, women settled comfortably in their folding chairs, coffee cups refilled more than once, cookie crumbs scattered lightly on a few laps, laughter rising and falling in easy waves that show no sign yet of fading. The earlier structure of the evening, the demonstration, the game, the careful discussion of price, has given way entirely now to something simpler and, in its own way, more valuable. An evening spent genuinely enjoying the company of neighbours and friends. The Tupperware lady, having finished packing her case, accepts a final cup of coffee before excusing herself gently, thanking the room once more for its hospitality before slipping quietly toward the door. Her evening's work here concluded even as the party itself continues on comfortably without her. Your neighbour sees her out with warm thanks, then returns to the gathered circle, settling into an empty chair herself for the first time all evening, finally able simply to enjoy her own party rather than manage it. It is the kind of unhurried, easy warmth harder to find now, a room full of neighbours lingering comfortably together long after the evening's stated purpose is concluded, content simply to sit a while longer in one another's company. One woman tells a story about a casserole dish that shattered in her refrigerator last winter, the mess it made, the hours spent scrubbing, and the room erupts into a chorus of similar disasters: spoiled milk, leaking jars, soup gone sour because the lid never quite fit. Tonight, for the first time, all of that feels like it might finally be behind you. The woman telling the story, seated near the far end of the circle, describes the incident with a particular animation of someone who's clearly told this tale before and knows exactly how to draw out its most amusing details. The dish, she explains, had been balanced a little precariously on the icebox's top shelf, overloaded already with other containers crowded in around it, when some small shift or vibration sent it tumbling suddenly onto the shelf below, shattering into pieces that scattered a full casserole's worth of sauce and noodles across everything nearby. She describes the clean-up that followed with such vivid, exasperated detail. The sauce that had somehow found its way into the vegetable drawer, the noodles wedged into corners she did not know her icebox possessed, The hours spent on her knees scrubbing every shelf and surface, that the room dissolves quickly into genuine sympathetic laughter, several women wiping at their eyes as the story reaches its increasingly absurd conclusion. It is the kind of disaster that feels almost mythic in its scope, though clearly rooted in perfectly ordinary household misfortune. Her story opens the floodgates, it seems, and soon the room is trading similar tales in quick succession, each woman offering her own small culinary catastrophe, with the particular relish that comes from finally having an appreciative audience for a story likely met with only mild sympathy at home. Someone recounts a jar of preserves that leaks slowly and undetected for nearly a week, ruining an entire shelf's worth of other stored goods before the smell finally gave away the disaster. Another woman describes milk gone sour in a container that never quite sealed properly, the smell so overwhelming when she finally opened it that she'd needed to air out her entire kitchen for the better part of an afternoon. The room groans in sympathetic recognition, several women nodding along, clearly recalling similar sour milk disasters of their own, even if they do not share the specific story tonight. You find yourself laughing freely along with the rest of the room, genuinely delighted by the easy camaraderie these shared disasters produce, each new story met with its own chorus of exclamations and sympathetic laughter. There is something wonderfully levelling about these small confessions, a room full of women who might otherwise present carefully composed households to the world, admitting freely tonight to years of leaking jars and shattered dishes and spoiled, forgotten leftovers. Dorothy offers her own contribution, a story about a soup pot lid that never quite fit properly, resulting in a slow, gradual spoilage that she did not discover until the smell had already permeated half her icebox, ruining a week's worth of other stored food in the process. She tells it with the same self-deprecating humour as the others, the room laughing along warmly at her expense, though clearly recognising the story as one that could easily have happened in any of their own kitchens. The conversation, having built now to a genuine crescendo of shared domestic disaster, turns naturally back toward the evening's earlier subject, several women glancing again toward the card table where the Tupperware ladies' display had been arranged, now packed away but still present in memory. Someone remarks, half laughing still, that perhaps tonight's purchases might finally spare them all from adding new chapters to this particular collection of kitchen catastrophes. You think of your own small order, the modest set of green bowls waiting now to arrive at your door in a few weeks' time, and feel a quiet satisfaction settle over you at the thought that perhaps you might avoid contributing your own disaster story to some future evening's laughter. It is a small, practical hope, but a genuine one, born directly from the shared, laughing recognition that has filled the room these past several minutes. The stories eventually taper off, the room's laughter softening gradually back into easier, quieter conversation, though the warm camaraderie built through this shared exchange of kitchen disasters lingers pleasantly over the remainder of the evening. There is a particular closeness that comes from admitting your failures aloud among neighbours and finding, instead of judgment, only warm, recognising laughter in return. It is the kind of shared, unguarded laughter harder to find now, a room full of women confessing their small domestic disasters freely to one another, discovering in the confession not embarrassment but a closeness built from simply honestly being understood. You notice your neighbour watching the room with a small satisfied smile, the kind that comes from hosting something successful in your own living room, from being, if only for one evening, the centre of everyone's attention and everyone's gratitude. She sits now in the chair she finally claimed for herself once the Tupperware lady departed, her earlier restless energy as hostess having settled into something quieter and more contented, watching her living room still filled with warm, easy laughter, long after the evening's official purpose has concluded. You catch her eye briefly across the circle, and she offers a small, private smile, the kind exchanged between women who understand exactly what has been accomplished tonight without needing to say it aloud. There is something quietly moving in watching her this way, seeing the evident satisfaction she takes in having successfully gathered her neighbours together, in having rearranged her own furniture and borrowed enough chairs and brewed enough coffee to fill an entire evening with genuine warmth and laughter. It is not a grand accomplishment, hosting a single evening gathering in her own home, and yet you sense, watching her now, that it feels like one to her nonetheless. She glances occasionally toward the kitchen doorway, checking perhaps on the coffee still warming there, though her attention returns quickly each time to the room itself, to the women still gathered comfortably in her borrowed folding chairs, still trading small stories and easy laughter, well past the point when the evening might have reasonably concluded. There is a proprietary warmth in the way she watches this unfold, the quiet pride of someone who has created, however modestly, something genuinely worth staying for. You think of the small cream-coloured invitation that first brought you here, tucked carefully under your sugar bowl earlier this week, and realise now how much thought and effort must have gone into an invitation that seemed, at the time, almost casual in its simplicity. The borrowed chairs, the lace tablecloth, the careful arrangement of her own living room, all of it planned and executed with a quiet determination you had not fully appreciated, until seeing the evening's genuine success reflected now in her satisfied expression. Several women approach her in turn as the evening continues, offering their own warm thanks for the invitation, complimenting the coffee, the cookies, the general success of an evening none of them had quite known what to expect from when they first arrived. She accepts each compliment with evident pleasure, though also with a becoming modesty, deflecting credit occasionally toward the Tupperware ladies' engaging demonstration, or simply toward the good company of her neighbours and friends. You notice, watching her receive this steady stream of gratitude, how carefully she seems to be holding on to this particular evening, glancing around the room every so often, as though trying to fix the scene permanently in memory. The folding chairs, the lingering coffee cups, the easy laughter still rippling occasionally through the gathered circle. It is the kind of evening you sense that she will likely recount fondly to her own friends and family in the weeks to come, a small personal triumph tucked away among her collection of memories. Dorothy leans toward you at one point, murmuring quietly that your neighbour has done a wonderful job tonight, better perhaps than the cousin whose own gathering first inspired this evening's arrangement. You agree readily, genuinely impressed by how smoothly the whole evening has unfolded, from the careful rearrangement of furniture through the demonstration and game and shared stories, all the way to this comfortable, lingering conclusion that shows no urgency yet to end. You think, watching your neighbour's quiet satisfaction continue to radiate gently across the room, of the particular pleasure available to a woman in hosting something successfully in her own home, a pleasure perhaps undervalued in the ordinary rhythm of household life, where so much daily effort goes unnoticed and unremarked. Tonight, at least, her effort has been seen clearly, appreciated openly, and rewarded with an evening of genuine warmth that she helped, quite deliberately, to create. As the room's conversation continues its easy, unhurried drift, you catch her eye once more, and this time she raises her coffee cup slightly in your direction. A small, informal toast exchanged silently between neighbours who have shared, tonight, something genuinely pleasant together. You raise your own cup in return, the gesture small but sincere, a fitting close to an evening that began with simple curiosity and has ended in something considerably warmer. It is the kind of quiet, well-earned pride harder to notice from the outside, a woman watching her own living room fill with genuine warmth and laughter, and finding in that sight a satisfaction that no compliment alone could quite fully capture. As the evening winds down, women begin gathering purses and light sweaters, thanking the hostess, thanking the Tupperware lady, promising to host their own parties before the month is out. There is a warmth in the doorway that feels different from when you arrived. The particular closeness that comes from an evening spent laughing together over something as small as plastic bowls. The shift happens gradually, the way these evenings always seem to end. No single moment marking the transition from lingering conversation to the first quiet movements toward departure. Someone glances at the clock on the mantel and remarks, with mild surprise, how late it has grown, and the comment ripples outward through the room. Several women checking their own watches with the particular reluctance of guests who have genuinely enjoyed themselves and are not quite ready for the evening to conclude. Dorothy rises first, smoothing her skirt and reaching for the light sweater she had draped over the back of her chair earlier, thanking your neighbour warmly for the invitation before turning to gather her own belongings. Her movement seems to signal something to the rest of the room, and soon several women are stirring in similar fashion, purses retrieved from beneath chairs, sweaters shrugged back over shoulders that have grown slightly cool now that the evening's earlier warmth has settled into something quieter. You watch the room transform once more, this time not through any deliberate rearrangement, but through the natural, unhurried choreography of neighbours saying their goodbyes. Your hostess moves among her departing guests with evident warmth, accepting compliments and thanks with the same becoming modesty she showed earlier. Though you notice her expression carries now a deeper contentment, the satisfaction of an evening that has clearly exceeded whatever modest hope she held for it. Several women pause at the doorway to exchange a final word or two, promises made easily in the loose, generous spirit that follows a genuinely pleasant evening, that they simply must do this again soon, that perhaps one of them should host the very next gathering before the season turns too cold for such things. You sense that some of these promises will be kept and others gently forgotten in the ordinary busyness of daily life, though tonight, in this warm doorway, every promise feels entirely sincere. Your own turn to gather your things arrives eventually, and you retrieve your purse from beneath your chair, smoothing your skirt out of the habit before rising to join the small cluster of women now gathered near the front door. Your neighbour catches your eye as you approach, her smile widening with genuine pleasure, and she reaches out to squeeze your hand briefly, thanking you for coming, telling you how glad she is that you decided to attend after all your earlier uncertainty about what exactly a Tupperware party might involve. You return her thanks warmly, meaning every word of it, surprised at how thoroughly your earlier curiosity has transformed over the course of the evening into genuine, uncomplicated enjoyment. You mention, almost without planning to, that you might consider hosting an evening of your own sometime soon, and her face lights up further at the suggestion, offering immediately to help however she can, to lend you her own borrowed folding chairs if needed, to share the Tupperware lady's information so you might arrange your own demonstration. The doorway fills gradually with this kind of warm, overlapping conversation. Several small exchanges happening at once as departing guests linger a moment longer before finally stepping out into the cooling evening air. Someone laughs once more about the earlier casserole disaster story, prompting a final ripple of amusement even as coats are buttoned and purses adjusted for the walk home. The evening's earlier laughter seems reluctant to fully dissipate, lingering pleasantly in these last exchanged words. You step out onto the porch behind Dorothy, the night air cooler now than when you arrived, carrying the particular hush that settles over a neighbourhood once most households have retreated indoors for the evening. A few porch lights still glow warmly along the street, though many have already gone dark, and somewhere a dog barks once, briefly, before falling silent again. Your neighbour stands in her doorway watching her guests disperse into the darkness, waving once more as the last few women start down her front walk, her expression still carrying that same quiet, satisfied warmth you noticed earlier in the evening. You wave back before turning to start your own walk home, feeling the pleasant weight of a genuinely enjoyable evening settling comfortably over you. It is the kind of warm, unhurried farewell harder to find now, neighbours lingering in a lit doorway a little longer than necessary, reluctant to let a good evening end, promising more evenings just like it before, finally, gently, letting the night close in around them. The walk home feels different than the walk over, the streets quieter now, porch lights glowing steady against the dark. You carry your order slip folded carefully in your purse, already imagining where the new containers will live in your kitchen. The evening air has cooled considerably since you first stepped out earlier tonight, carrying now the faint, comfortable chill that settles over the neighbourhood once true darkness arrives. You pull your light sweater a little more snugly around your shoulders, grateful you thought to bring it, and fall into step alongside Dorothy, who lives 2 houses further down the same quiet street, the two of you walking together in the companionable near silence of women who have already exhausted the evening's most pressing conversation. The houses you pass look different in this deeper darkness than they did earlier, familiar shapes rendered softer and less distinct, punctuated here and there by the warm glow of a lit window where a family still moves about before bedtime, or the steady, welcoming light of a porch lamp left burning for a husband's late return from work. You notice the particular hush that settles over a residential street this late in the evening, broken only occasionally by the distant hum of a passing car or the soft creak of your own footsteps against the sidewalk. Dorothy mentions, breaking the comfortable quiet between you, that she genuinely enjoyed tonight more than she expected to when she first received the invitation, admitting with a small laugh that she had nearly declined, uncertain whether an evening built around plastic bowls could possibly hold her interest for very long. You laugh along with her, admitting your own similar uncertainty at the outset, and the shared confession draws you both a little closer together in the pleasant, honest way such small admissions often do. You reach into your purse briefly as you walk, feeling for the folded order slip tucked safely inside, its presence oddly reassuring, tangible proof of the evening's small but genuine accomplishment. You do not need to unfold it to remember what you selected, the modest 2-bowl set in that soft green shade, but you find yourself wanting to touch it anyway, the way you might touch a letter received earlier in the day, simply to confirm it remains exactly where you left it. The conversation between you and Dorothy drifts easily now towards smaller, quieter subjects, the weather expected for the coming weekend, a church function planned for the following Sunday, the ordinary threads of neighbourhood life that fill the comfortable silence between 2 women walking home together after a pleasant evening. There is no urgency in this conversation, no need to fill every pause with words, simply the easy companionship of shared proximity and a mutual, unspoken satisfaction with how the evening unfolded. You glance up briefly at the sky as you walk, finding a scattering of stars visible now that the last traces of daylight have fully surrendered to darkness, the particular deep blue-black of a clear summer night settling over the neighbourhood's rooftops and trees. It is the kind of sky you rarely pause to notice during your ordinary daily errands, too occupied with groceries or children or household chores to look up and simply observe the evening settling in around you. Dorothy reaches her own front walk before you reach yours, pausing to say a final good night, mentioning once more how glad she is that the 2 of you attended together tonight, promising to compare notes once your respective orders finally arrive. You return her good night warmly, Continuing on alone now for the final short stretch toward your own front door, the street growing even quieter in these last few minutes of your walk. You find yourself thinking, as you walk this last stretch alone, about where exactly the new green bowls might fit once they arrive, running through your kitchen cabinets in your mind, considering whether they might replace the mismatched coffee can currently holding your flour, or perhaps find a more natural home alongside whatever leftover dish next needs proper storing. It is a small, pleasant daydream, the kind that makes an ordinary walk home feel just slightly more purposeful than usual. Your own porch light comes into view finally, glowing warmly against the surrounding darkness, and you feel the particular relief of a familiar destination reached after a satisfying evening spent elsewhere. You climb the front steps slowly, still turning over the evening's small pleasures in your mind, the coffee and laughter, the shared stories, the quiet decision finally committed to paper. It is the kind of quiet, contented walk home harder to find now. The neighbourhood settling into stillness around you, a small folded order slip tucked safely in your purse, and the pleasant, lingering warmth of a genuinely enjoyable evening still wrapped comfortably around your shoulders like the sweater you carried the whole way home. At home, your husband asks how the evening was, and you find yourself describing the burping demonstration with more enthusiasm than you expected, watching him try and fail to understand why a sealed bowl could possibly be so exciting. You find him still awake when you step through the front door, seated in his usual chair with the evening paper folded beside him, the radio murmuring low from its place on the side table. He glances up as you enter, offering the easy, familiar greeting of a husband accustomed to his wife's occasional evening visits with the neighbours, asking simply how it went, his attention only partially diverted from whatever article he'd been reading. You settle into the chair across from him, slipping off your shoes with a particular relief of feet that have stood and walked rather more than usual tonight, and begin describing the evening with more animation than you initially intended. You mention the borrowed folding chairs first, the lace tablecloth, the pastel containers arranged so carefully on the card table, watching his expression remain politely attentive but not yet particularly engaged. The way a husband's attention often settles during descriptions of an evening he did not attend himself. It is only when you reach the demonstration itself, describing the way the Tupperware lady pressed the lid down and the small, surprising hiss of air that escaped, that you notice his attention sharpen slightly, a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. You demonstrate the gesture with your own empty hands, pressing an imaginary lid down and making a soft sound with your lips to approximate the noise, and he laughs outright now, clearly amused by your evident enthusiasm for something so small and, to him, faintly ridiculous. You continue, undeterred by his gentle amusement, explaining how the whole room had laughed the very first time the sound escaped, how the bowl had been passed from hand to hand afterward so each woman could test the seal herself, how a small game had even been organised around passing the container while music played. He listens now with genuine interest, if only because your own animated retelling has made the evening sound considerably more entertaining than he likely imagined it could be. You mention, a little more carefully now, that you placed a small order before the evening concluded, a modest 2-bowl set in a soft green shade, and watch his expression shift slightly toward the practical concern that so often accompanies any household expenditure, however modest. You explain quickly, before he can ask, exactly how much the set cost, framing it gently alongside the quiet frustration you have long felt with your current collection of mismatched bowls and repurposed coffee cans. He considers this for a moment, running his hand thoughtfully along his jaw the way he often does when weighing a small household decision, before shrugging and admitting that if it means fewer spoiled leftovers cluttering up the icebox, The modest cost seems reasonable enough to him. You feel a small private satisfaction at this easy agreement, grateful that the evening's earlier careful arithmetic has translated so smoothly into a decision your husband finds perfectly sensible. He asks, half teasing now, whether you plan to host your own version of this gathering sometime soon, recalling perhaps some vague memory of you mentioning the idea to your neighbour earlier this evening, though you had not intended to share that particular thought with him quite yet. You admit, a little sheepishly, that the idea had crossed your mind, and he laughs again, though not unkindly, teasing you gently about rearranging his own living room furniture to accommodate a room full of neighbours and their plastic bowls. The conversation continues for a few more minutes in this easy, familiar rhythm, your husband asking small clarifying questions here and there, mostly out of genuine curiosity now rather than mere politeness, clearly charmed despite himself by your evident enthusiasm for an evening that sounded, by his own earlier estimation, rather unremarkable. You find yourself grateful for this small willingness on his part to indulge your enthusiasm, however foreign the subject might be to his own daily concerns. Eventually the conversation winds down naturally, drifting toward other small matters of the evening, whether the children slept well while you were out, what tomorrow's schedule might hold, the ordinary threads of household life reasserting themselves gently after the evening's small departure from routine. You rise eventually to begin your own preparations for bed, still carrying with you the pleasant warmth of an evening well spent and now well shared. It is the kind of small, easy exchange harder to notice as meaningful in the moment. A wife describing her evening to a mildly amused but genuinely attentive husband, finding in his gentle teasing and easy agreement the quiet, comfortable partnership that so much of an ordinary marriage is built upon. In the weeks that follow, you find yourself glancing toward the front door a little more often than usual, waiting for the package that will finally bring your new containers home. The same quiet anticipation you might feel waiting for a letter from someone far away. The days settle back quickly into their ordinary rhythm following the evening at your neighbour's house, the household chores and small errands filling your mornings and afternoons much as they always have, and yet you notice a small, persistent thread of anticipation running quietly beneath the surface of these otherwise unremarkable days. Each morning, after seeing the children off to school and beginning your usual round of household tasks, you find your attention drifting toward the front window whenever you pass it, watching for the mail carrier's familiar approach a little more attentively than the occasion probably warrants. You mention the anticipated delivery once or twice to Dorothy, running into her at the grocery or exchanging a brief word over the fence, and she admits to the same small restlessness, her own order having been placed that same evening, her own kitchen similarly awaiting its promised improvement. There's a small shared amusement in comparing notes this way, two grown women admitting freely to one another that they find themselves watching for the mail with something close to a child's excitement over an approaching birthday. The first week passes without any sign of the package, and you remind yourself patiently that the Tupperware lady had mentioned several weeks might pass before delivery, the reminder doing little to fully quiet the small, persistent hope that rises each time you hear a vehicle slow along your street or spot movement near your mailbox. You busy yourself instead with your usual household routines, though you notice yourself thinking, more often than you might have expected, about the modest green bowls waiting somewhere between the company's warehouse and your own front door. Your husband notices your small preoccupation eventually, teasing you gently over supper one evening about your evident eagerness for what he still refers to, with mild amusement, as your plastic bowls, though his teasing carries no real edge to it, more genuine affection than mockery. You take the teasing in good humour, admitting freely that you are indeed looking forward to the delivery more than perhaps a modest kitchen purchase strictly warrants, though you suspect he understands, in his own way, the small pleasure of anticipating something new arriving to improve an otherwise ordinary household routine. The second week brings a similar pattern of quiet, patient waiting, your attention drawn periodically toward the front door or the sound of an approaching vehicle, though you manage now to hold this anticipation a little more loosely, allowing it to exist alongside your other daily tasks rather than dominating your thoughts entirely. You find yourself, during quiet moments, imagining exactly where the new bowls will find their place among your existing cabinet arrangement, picturing the mismatched coffee cans finally retired, the green containers taking their place instead. You mention the pending delivery to your mother during a Sunday visit, describing the evening at your neighbour's house with the same enthusiasm you first shared with your husband, and she listens with genuine interest, recalling her own similar excitement decades earlier over some now forgotten household improvement, some small modern convenience that had once seemed similarly novel and promising. There is comfort in this small intergenerational recognition, the understanding that this particular small anticipation, waiting eagerly for some promised household improvement, is hardly unique to your own moment in time. By the third week, your daily glances toward the front door have become almost habitual, woven seamlessly now into your ordinary morning routine alongside checking the weather or listening for the children stirring upstairs. You have grown almost fond of this small, persistent anticipation, finding in it a gentle, harmless pleasure that brightens otherwise unremarkable days, with the quiet possibility that today might finally be the day. You think, during one particularly ordinary afternoon spent folding laundry, about how strange it is that something as small as a set of plastic bowls could produce this much genuine anticipation, and yet you find you do not mind the strangeness of it at all. There is something quietly lovely in allowing yourself this small, uncomplicated excitement over an ordinary household improvement, a reminder that pleasure does not always require grand occasions, that sometimes the anticipation of something small and practical can brighten an entire week's worth of otherwise unremarkable days. It is the kind of quiet, patient anticipation harder to find now, a simple package awaited eagerly over several ordinary weeks, transforming the small daily ritual of checking the mail into something quietly, pleasantly hopeful. When the box finally arrives, you unwrap each piece slowly, admiring the pastel shine, arranging them in your cabinet with something like ceremony. It is such a small thing, a few bowls and lids, and yet standing there in your kitchen, it feels like the start of something quietly, wonderfully new. The package arrives on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a driver who hands it over with no particular ceremony of his own, simply another parcel among his many stops for the day, though for you the moment carries considerably more weight than his brief, business-like nod might suggest. You carry the box inside carefully, setting it on the kitchen table with the same careful attention you might give something considerably more fragile, though you know well enough by now that the contents inside are sturdier than they might first appear. You take a moment before opening it, simply looking at the box itself, the company's name printed neatly across its top, your own address written in a clerk's careful hand just below. There is something satisfying in this brief pause, the small ceremony of anticipation finally reaching its conclusion, weeks of quiet waiting condensed now into this single ordinary Tuesday afternoon, sunlight falling warm across your kitchen table through the window above the sink. You open the box slowly, folding back the cardboard flaps to reveal the contents nestled carefully inside, wrapped in tissue paper that rustles softly as you lift each piece free. The first bowl emerges into the afternoon light exactly as you remembered it from that evening weeks ago, that same soft, gentle green, its surface catching the sunlight with a subtle sheen that makes it look, somehow, even more appealing here in your own kitchen than it did on your neighbour's card table. You set it down on the table and reach for the next piece, unwrapping the accompanying lid with the same careful attention, running your thumb briefly along its curved edge the way you saw the Tupperware lady do that evening, recalling instantly the particular satisfaction of watching that seal form so neatly. The second bowl follows, slightly smaller than the first, its lid unwrapped alongside it, until all 4 pieces of your modest order sit arranged neatly across your kitchen table, catching the afternoon light in a way that makes your ordinary kitchen feel for a moment subtly transformed. You gather the discarded tissue paper and set it aside, then turn your attention toward your kitchen cabinets, considering carefully where these new containers might best find their place. You open the cabinet that has long held your collection of mismatched bowls and repurposed coffee cans, studying the crowded shelf with fresh eyes now that you hold something new and properly matched to compare against it. The coffee can holding your flour catches your eye first, its label long faded, and you find yourself, without quite deciding to, reaching for it and setting it aside on the counter, making room instead for one of your new green bowls. The transfer of flour from can to bowl takes only a few minutes, though you find yourself lingering over the small task, pressing the lid down once complete, and listening for that same satisfying hiss of escaping air you first heard weeks ago in your neighbour's living room. It arrives exactly as promised, and you smile at the small private satisfaction of hearing it again here, finally in your own kitchen rather than someone else's. You arrange the remaining bowl and lids with similar care, finding places for them among your existing collection, though you notice already how they seem to draw the eye more readily than everything surrounding them, their soft green shade standing out cheerfully against the more subdued, mismatched collection they now share shelf space with. It occurs to you that perhaps, in time, you might replace more of your kitchen's odd assortment with pieces like these, gradually building towards something closer to what you admired so clearly during that evening's demonstration. You step back finally to survey the results of your small afternoon's work, genuinely pleased by how the new additions have settled into your kitchen's existing rhythm, not overwhelming what came before, but quietly improving it, piece by piece. There is a modest satisfaction in this, the small practical pleasure of a household task completed thoughtfully, a problem you had barely allowed yourself to name now genuinely, if partially, addressed. You think, standing there in your kitchen with the afternoon light still falling warm across the table, of the evening that first brought you here, the borrowed folding chairs, the small burst of shared laughter, the modest decision finally committed to paper. It feels, in this quiet moment, like considerably more than just a few plastic bowls now properly arranged in your cabinet, more like the small, tangible proof of an evening spent genuinely well among neighbours, its warmth still lingering faintly here in your own kitchen weeks later. It is the kind of small, quiet contentment harder to notice as significant until you're standing in your own kitchen, admiring something so modest and ordinary, and finding in it nonetheless a genuine and lasting satisfaction. So as the evening finally settles and the last of the coffee has gone cold in its cup, let's sit for a moment with everything we just walked through together. A small cream-coloured invitation, a living room quietly rearranged, a room full of women passing a plastic bowl from hand to hand, laughing at something as simple as the sound of air escaping a sealed lid. There was no grand occasion in any of it, just neighbours, gathered on an ordinary Thursday, finding a little joy in something small, that is worth honouring, tonight and always. The women who lived this era were not waiting for history to notice them. They were folding towels, minding budgets, wrapping bread in dish towels and hoping for the best. They were building small, steady kinships over folding chairs and coffee cups, one Thursday evening at a time. They did not call it community. They simply called it Thursday. Maybe that is the small thing worth carrying forward tonight, into your own life, into tomorrow. Not the bowls themselves, though they were lovely in their way, but the spirit behind that evening, the willingness to open your own living room to the people around you, the patience to sit a little longer over coffee than you meant to, the quiet pleasure of a shared story, a shared laugh, a shared ordinary evening that asked for nothing more than your presence. History is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a card table with a lace cloth and a room full of women deciding together that an evening spent laughing over plastic bowls was exactly enough. And it was. It always was. So let the evening close gently now. Let the porch lights dim one by one down the street. Somewhere, a screen door creaks shut for the last time tonight, and the house settles into quiet. Rest well. You have earned it.